all of you here this morning, today as we convene for the public session of the PAFI Annual General Meeting 2026. We are here to discuss a theme that is as complex as it is critical: geopolitics, policy, and business, India 3.0 in a fragmenting world. In an era defined by shifting alliances and economic uncertainty, understanding India's role is vital for every public affairs professional and business leader in this room. We have designed this as a conversational dialogue to truly unpack the structural shifts underway globally. It will be on record. To lead this, we are privileged to have a stellar group of experts with us this morning. Ajay Bisaria, our moderator, is a corporate strategic advisor and the former High Commissioner of India to Canada and Pakistan. He brings over 3 decades of diplomatic experience and expertise in geopolitics, trade, and India's Eurasia policy. Joining him on the panel are Raj Chengappa, the Group Editorial Director, publishing at the India Today Group. With over 4 decades in journalism, he has reported on major global conflicts, interviewed prominent domestic and international leaders, and authored the widely acclaimed book on India's quest to be a nuclear power. Anil Padmanabhan, a veteran journalist with a career spanning 38 years, having worked with premier publications like Business Standard and Mint, he now provides deep analysis on the intersection of politics and economics through his weekly column, Capital Calculus. Suhasini Haidar is the diplomatic editor at The Hindu. She's a seasoned journalist recognized for her deep field reporting across global conflict zones and her weekly insights on foreign policy. Navdeep Suri is the former Indian ambassador to the UAE and Egypt and High Commissioner to Australia. A distinguished diplomat for 36 years, he's played an important role in shaping India's economic diplomacy and its engagement with the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. With such a wealth of experience on the stage, I'm certain that this will be an insightful session. I now hand over the floor to Ajay to begin the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Chetan. Thank you. Very good morning. Welcome to this panel. As Chetan said, we're talking of a bit of a long framing of what we're going to discuss, which is geopolitics, policy, and business, and India 3.0 in a fragmenting world. I'm presuming when we talk of India 3.0, we're talking of the NDA 3.0. But I leave it to the panelists to interpret that as they would like to. So before we dive in, let me just give you a recap of what the fragmenting world looks like this week. So we have, of course, the headline issue of the West Asia conflict, technically in a ceasefire and with a deal under negotiation. But in the last few hours, what the US has done is done some strikes, which are called non-escalatory strikes on Iranian sites, Iranian tankers, those sort of, some are calling it a tanker war. The markets are not convinced that this is peace. Yesterday, they seemed to be persuaded that things were getting better, so they climbed, and today they've fallen on this news. So what we are seeing on one reckoning is the art of the deal, Godfather style. You basically negotiated with a loaded gun on your side, and Trump has kind of validated that by saying, we hope we get a deal, but we'll knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently if Iran doesn't sign a deal soon. So if you remember the first scene of The Godfather, there's a story being told about, the way the deal is done is that you tell the other person that either your signature or your brains will be on the contract. So it's pretty much similar. But, the other theater is not silent, which is the Ukraine theater. We've had the latest exchange of drone attacks this week. Russia claims to have shot 347 Ukrainian drones before a 2-day unilateral ceasefire starting today for the weekend 9th May Victory Day celebrations. So there again, the Alaska process is the only act in town for peace. But right now, Trump seems too busy to sort of get to it. So where does that lead? That has huge consequences also for the economy. Also, I think in many ways, May is promising to be a busy month for what will follow. Next week, Trump goes to China on 14th May for some kind of the mother of all deals is what he's promising, but it will clearly be tactical accommodation, not strategic reset. But we're also hearing that China is becoming part of the conversation on the peacemaking in the West Asia situation, with possibly being involved in the end game of ending the blockade. And there we had Abbas Araghchi, Iranian foreign minister, go there. He also went to Russia. But one peculiar sort of feature of this war is that both the Russians and the Chinese have been arm's length from this whole situation. We also have the India-US tariff deal under discussion. And in the last few 24 hours, we've had the US Court of International Trade, which has sort of called misguided the 10% tariff that we are under Section 122 of the Trade Act 1974. That's another dynamic in play. And on the US-India relationship, we expect Marco Rubio to be here at the end of the month, possibly with a Quad summit, which kind of takes the relationship forward in the India-US bilateral, but also a possibility or a definite possibility of a Modi-Trump meeting in Paris next month on the sidelines of the G7 outreach. So that dynamic goes on. We also have the BRICS Foreign Ministers Summit coming up. The Russians are confirmed, most of the others, and possibly all the warring parties of the West Asia conflict, the Iranians, and the UAE and others might be in town. So let's see what happens with that. And PM Modi goes off to Europe now for Europe outreach, which takes him to Norway, Sweden, Italy, and also for a few hours to the UAE. So all this is happening, and also we are talking right now of 1 year of Op Sindoor. A lot of conversation there, but the key question from a business standpoint is, has the risk of another India-Pakistan conflict been alleviated in this 1 year of ceasefire, or does it still persist? And we have a global economy forecast, which is saying that the global economic growth could go down from the projection of 3% if all this persists. And also for the Indian economy, whether we go down from the 6.5% projected rate to even lower if we have a few more months of this conflict. So we have, in that context, this stellar panel to unpack many of these issues. And for me, it's especially a privilege because I call this the revenge panel. This is the revenge of geopolitics, but also my revenge, because all of these folks have asked me lots of questions in the last month, and today in the last year and in the last month. So thanks, Ajay, for reversing the order and allowing me the privilege of asking the question. So what we're going to do in the next 55, 60 minutes of the panel before we open up for your questions is that we'll stick with the West Asia conflict, perhaps for the first 15, 20 minutes, give each of the panelists 5 minutes on that, and then free for all with many of the other issues that I talked about. So let me begin this by asking Navdeep, the West Asia man of MEA, about what he sees happening in West Asia. And are we in for the final blow or the ceasefire? Tell us what's happening in the next 3 days and put it in context, Navdeep.
Thanks, Ajay, and thanks, Ajay. A pleasure to be here. Since you started off with that note of revenge, on the 26th of February, Ajay and I were at a similar sort of conversation in Chennai. and I was asking the questions. And Ajay had made an absolutely brilliant presentation on geopolitical risks, and charts and PowerPoint graphs and so on. And I agreed 99% with it. 1% where I disagreed was he assigned a low probability of risk to the closure of Hormuz. and I said, please don't rule it out. Black swans are being sighted increasingly in different parts of the globe, and that's where we are today. But I know it's risky to take on the moderator, so let me quickly move away from that from that topic. Look, I'll make three broad points on where we are. First, we really have no idea where we are. Because in the last 24 hours and the last 48 and the last 72, we've flip-flopped from epic fury to project freedom, from one to the other, what's happening, what is not happening. All I can say is, firstly, Trump is desperately looking for an exit. He does not wish to escalate this. Second, he has no good options, and any option that he chooses will require a degree of a climb down, which perhaps he's not ready for politically. Third, I think the Iranians, after having played a poor hand pretty well, are also taking the risk of being too ambitious in their aspirations and run the risk of escalation, which nobody really wants. And fourth, with all of this crap about one-page memo and 14 points and so on, let's recognize that there are four essential issues on which positions are far, far apart. On the nuclear issue, everything from what level of enrichment Iran can be allowed, for how long will the moratorium be, to what happens with 440 kilograms of enriched uranium, etc. Two, what happens with the sanctions, and especially the heavy-duty sanctions that Trump 1.0 had imposed. Third, what happens to the $28 billion of frozen Iranian funds in various accounts? I don't take the demand for reparations too seriously at this stage, but fourth and fundamentally, what happens with the Strait of Hormuz? Are the Iranians going to get away with their plans to impose a new regime, a toll tax, whatever else it is called, on an international waterway? Everybody would say it's blatantly illegal and not allowed. But hey, what's legal these days? The attack wasn't legal, Gaza wasn't legal. So, I think we are, the bar of legality has been lowered to a point where these will become academic conversations. The second point is the impact on the Gulf countries. They are in a mess, and this was a war that they desperately wanted to avoid because they knew the worst case scenarios that could emerge. Even the Iranians had warned them before the war that this is what we would do if we are attacked this time, unlike Operation Midnight Hammer last year. They faced, through the last month, what I would call a trilemma of how to respond. There was a school of thought in UAE and Saudi Arabia that we have capable defense forces, we have all the hardware, why not attack? But the risk that they run is, how long will the US continue? Are they going to be left out on a limb that they enter the conflict militarily and are left high and dry? Second, if they don't do anything, what is the message that it sends to Iran? And the third, and this is really a conversation particularly that the Omanis initiated right at the beginning of the conflict, that from a GCC point of view, which is the worst nightmare? An unrestrained, unpredictable, wounded Iran, or a belligerent and expansionist Israel? And that, again, for several countries in the region, is a major concern. There isn't any degree of unanimity on this. The Omanis obviously are taking a much softer position on Iran and a much harder position on Israel. The Qataris don't have much of a choice. They share the world's largest gas field with the Iranians, so they have to find a modus vivendi to live with the Iranians. The Saudis are kind of in the middle on where to go. But it's the Emiratis who have taken the hardest line and really doubled down on their bets with Israel and with the United States, and kind of, as of now, putting all their eggs in one basket. And we can debate whether that's a good idea or not. And the third, I think, really the aspect I wanted to discuss is about the impact on India, because very quickly we've moved from our Goldilocks situation to one where we are beginning to see serious signs of stress. I was having a conversation with my friends at DP World, who are perhaps one of the leading experts in the logistics and supply chains business. And I got a really grim prognostics from them, which is that even if the Strait of Hormuz were to open tomorrow, unrestricted, unrestrained, you're looking at 6 months before any semblance of normalcy, because you are in a situation where the ships are in one place, the containers are in another place, and the cargo is another place. And it will take 6 months to put Humpty Dumpty together again. On energy, there was a strong feeling that given that you've taken a good chunk, 20% of global energy supplies out of the picture now for 70 days. The inventories that have sustained up to this point of time are now running low, and the impact will start biting you in the next few weeks. And you will start seeing not just rising oil prices, but demand destruction potentially with its consequences if this continues. The third for us, trade. I don't know how many of you know, GCC is our single largest trading partner. Last year, our bilateral trade with GCC was $180 billion, of which $100 billion was with UAE alone. It's also our largest single market for exports, $60 billion last year, along with America, I think, which is a similar-ish number. UAE alone was $38 billion. Nothing is moving. Not the basmati, not the biscuits, not the garments, not the gems. And so exporters are beginning to feel that pinch across. Not just exporters, but producers who depended on everything from petrochemicals to raw materials for supplies. The third, and I think we haven't really looked at it enough, 6 of the world's 10 largest sovereign funds are in the Gulf, $5 trillion in assets. Over the last decade, they have been a good, reliable source of patient capital for the Indian economy, whether it was ADIA or ADQ or IHC or QIA or any of these others. You're looking at major reconstruction and reprioritization in the Gulf in the coming years. And so I guess the question mark for me is, what does it mean for capital allocations for India, which we were kind of taking for granted up till now. And the last point from my side is on remittances. 9 million Indians in the Gulf. Out of the latest IOM report, $138 billion is what we got in remittances last year. 40% comes from the GCC 6 countries. That's $55 billion, of which 25 comes from UAE alone. What does the slowdown of economies in the GCC mean for our workers? My friends in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, etc., tell me the layoffs are already happening. People are being sent back home, particularly in the tourism and hospitality sectors, which have been the most vulnerable. And I think you might, the longer this continues, the more the impact will be. So I think we are really grappling with a situation where, in a line, geopolitics is your new macroeconomics, and it's something that we will need to really build into our calculus going forward. But do not worry, all is well. Prime Minister will be there this time next week, and that will be his 8th visit, and all will be sorted. Thank you.
Great. So excellent. I'm going to take the last bit about the energy shock and the economic shock later to Anil and to Raj. But I want to first come to Suhasini with the geopolitics. Now, do you agree with the way Navdeep has framed it? Is Trump in some kind of escalation trap, or is he going to run away with that one-page memorandum and say he's got the best deal?
I think it doesn't matter because whatever he does say, he will contradict that in a matter of hours, if not minutes. I think, the whole perspective on the West Asia war as it continues has to be a broader one. It has to now look at the situation around the world and the normalization of catastrophe that we now do on a daily basis. When you have the leader of the most powerful country, arguably, in the world, threaten nuclear annihilation. Just this morning, talk about the idea that if they don't sign the agreement, you will see a special kind of glow coming out of Iran. It's the same kind of idea. So we're normalizing not only conflict in the world, we're normalizing catastrophe. Amitav Ghosh did this podcast a few weeks ago, which I thought was very telling. He said, I am used to writing about a planet in crisis. I am now writing from inside the crisis because nobody is untouched by what is going on. The perspectives have changed. I can give you some of the figures. 2024, for example, was seen as the highest number of conflicts recorded since 1946. When people start to compare the situation today with the post-World War or the World War II situation, it is because it is actually happening. 61 conflicts in 2024, and Mr. Trump can list for us the conflicts that followed because he claims to have fixed them all. We are in our region. If I begin to just on one hand, on the fingers of one hand count all the shocks we are dealing with, it won't fit on one hand. And I'm just talking about 1 decade or half a decade that we are in today. From 2020, COVID, 2020 and 2021, the China invasion, or however you want to see it, amassing of troops along the line of actual control. That is followed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine that affects us all because of sanctions. That is followed by the Middle East situation, the West Asian situation, that in a sense has the seeds of what we are seeing today with the October 7th terror attacks in Israel and Israel's very, very brutal, unexpectedly harsh response to it, and the complete destruction of Gaza that we have seen followed, because that now has laid the foundations for a lot of instability in the region. You follow that by the next year, I have to say it, but the coming to power of Mr. Trump itself is a shock. The tariffs that he brought, the sanctions that he brought, and we discussed this, I think, at the last PAFI discussion I was at, but that sense of you don't know what you are going to get up with. 2025, apart from everything else, the India-Pakistan conflict. The seeds again there, because we are still in that conflict. Even Operation Epic Fury has been called off. Operation Sindoor has not yet been called off. So we are living inside that crisis as well. And that continues to what we are now seeing with the West Asia crisis, which affects us regionally in terms of stability, in terms of all the people that we have seen being affected. 4.3 million just in UAE, 10 million across the region are Indians. What happens if they need to return? We are looking at it in terms of food, fuel, the Hormuz crisis, in terms of fertilizer security. This is going to be, by the end of the month, is sowing season. Where are the fertilizers? We're also looking at a particularly hot summer. That will mean less water. I'm sorry, I sound really like gloom and doom, but what I'm saying is we are now living with these shocks on a daily basis, and shock after shock comes to us. The second thing that this West Asia war has shown us is really Thucydides' idea of the realpolitik. The strong will do what they can, the weak must suffer, what they must. And we've seen it with the initiation of this war by US and Israel. There's no doubt about it. Everyone has seen it with their own two eyes, and yet no one will say it. Except for a couple of powers antithetical to the US, nobody is actually saying, why did you start this war? India has not issued a single statement criticizing the US and Israel for their initiation of this war. Think about what that means. We can criticize the attack on a civilian outfit. We can criticize the attack on an energy installation. But we cannot even say, that it is wrong to have started this war. It is wrong to come inside our region and attack a ship that came on our Navy's invitation, kill 100 sailors on board, not help save them, and threaten more, to bring the war to our region. So we've been hit economically. We've been hit in terms of the war itself. The war is in South Asia, whether we like it or not. The peace is also in South Asia, but it's in Pakistan, so we can't really say too much about that. But the fact is that we are being affected by this West Asia war in a way we have not been affected by West Asia or any other regional war in the past. The third, we are now looking at the future of war. And it is frightening, because the first thing we know about this future of war is that there's no definitive causal action. I mean, we actually had Mr. Rubio say that Iran did not pose a threat to the US, but we knew that if Iran was attacked, i.e. by Israel, that they would attack us. So we had to attack them first. I mean, I actually watched a very senior person, repeat a comedian's act where he said, that's like me biting you and saying, you were not going to bite me, but I knew that if my dog bit you, you would attack me. I mean, there's no causal action. There is no definition of winners or losers, and there is no end to the war. The wars just continue. At various times, we'll see a ceasefire. We will not see the end of the war. We have dehumanized warfare. More and more targets are chosen by AI, and that is why 168 girls can be killed in a school, which again we cannot condemn, because we are more and more cut off from the means by which we are carrying out this warfare. We are looking, in a sense, at informational battle spaces. And we saw it in Operation Sindoor here. We see it in West Asia War with those Lego cartoons, more or less taking over the daily narration of what's happening in the war. So you don't just have to win the war. You have to win the information battle space as well. And there's a lot of ability now to fake what is coming out. And I think finally what we're seeing is the weaponization of everything. It's like the internet of all things. Now it is the weaponization of all things. If you give me one resource, I can show you how it is being weaponized by some part of the world or the other. If you live in the mountains, you are weaponizing the glaciers. If you live, if you live at the edge of the Hormuz Straits, you are weaponizing that. If India and Pakistan have a conflict and India says terror and talks can't go together, now we say water and blood can't go together. So we will do things in terms of weaponizing the Indus waters as well. And that is now the nature of the new wars that we are in. So I'm going to stop there, but I think what we need to look at is not just what this war is doing, but what this war is doing on the backs of all the other wars we have seen, which show us that essentially the top player, the world powers, are the ones who most benefited from the global order. They are breaking the rules of the global order. The middle powers are showing less and less restraint than they ever did before. As Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh said last week, in fact, the new world order is a world of no order.
Okay, yeah. So Raj, let's come to you. And anything that Navdeep or Suhasini said which provoked you, but basically also on whether this energy shock we're going through is more severe than the tariff shock of last year, which ended in February, or is it comparable? Or do you think it gets worse?
Thanks, Ajay, and happy to be here. Just to say the eloquence of my previous speakers is very difficult to match. I think they said, and articulated what I wanted to say on some of these areas far better than I ever could. I would just like to, in some senses, bring us back to, I guess this is the Public Affairs Society of India. And I think it's interesting that you should have this large geopolitical discussion showing that in some senses how much we're being impacted and buffeted by what's happening internationally. And I'm saying that because, Ajay, we started with your definition of India 3.0, which I don't agree with, because regimes come and go. India as a nation sustains. And if you take a look at why I'm saying this, is because if you look at India 1.0, what was it? Right? And that was, I would call it survival of democracy. We just was formed after independence. We had to prove ourselves in various areas, start from scratch. That's why giant public sectors came in. We had to build institutions. We had to do a lot of things, gain some self-sufficiency in food. So that was maybe the first order, but we allowed that to also spill over to what would be India 2.0, which was essentially, it's an arbitrary mark, right? 1991 and the reforms process that happened. And then we were looking at growth. So in the first 1.0 was survival. Second, I would call it growth, where you try to free up industry, get private sector in a big way. Also look abroad and see whether we can test our strengths there. And we did magnificently, as we saw with the IT sector and the growth and everything else. The third, maybe India 3.0 could be defined, not I'm saying with Mr. Modi's coming, but let's take 2020 so that we don't again make it regime specific. And there, I think we were looking at, in some senses, Mr. Modi articulated that, which was the Viksit Bharat dream of 2047, however distant it is, but essentially was India moving from growth to a leadership role of some kind. That we look, and we're not just innocent bystanders, as Suhasini was saying in the Iran conflict, but really look at where we can excel as China has done. And then that is the context that I'd like to deal with this particular crisis that we have, which is that when it comes to energy and when it comes to fertilizers, as you said, all of these things that we are looking at in terms of leadership are being impacted. And we are realizing how much we really have to grow and do things if we have to be what we want to be. And those are very simple dreams. I'm not even looking at leadership as a kind of Vishwa Guru or any of those things. I'm just saying we have a nation that we have to feed. That I think we're doing fairly well, and maybe too much of it right now, because I think you have 800 crore people actually getting free rations coming in, which is a statement by itself of our growth. We have to get off welfare, and we have to do welfare plus, because I think you're beginning to see that unrest happening. We saw what happened in Noida. We can say, well, it's nothing much, but there is a discontent that is there with just welfare. People are saying now, I need a job and I'm aspirational and I want that. Now, therefore, this crisis that has come in, and particularly in West Asia and elsewhere across the world, begins to impact us in ways that we have to be absolutely, if there's political solidity, as we can see, which happened in terms of the current round of elections, and the BJP has emerged as the hegemon or the most pivotal force that we're going to see in the next decade or so, the biggest challenge this government will face comes from the economy. And that economy is now being reflected and impacted seriously by what's happened in the Gulf, whether it's energy and whether it is, as I said, agriculture. So what do we do is the big point. We need to look at it primarily from our national interests. While we can talk eloquently on all the other aspects, what does India do? And I think there we have to, we keep saying about great, with great power comes great responsibility. I would say with great crisis comes great opportunity. And how do we then leverage that opportunity? If we take a look at the energy crisis, it must spur us to do the things that we have been dragging our feet on, whether it is in terms of nuclear power, which we are now moving towards, whether it's in terms of solar, whatever other aspects of it, or even drilling for oil, as we realized that there was so much that we could have done offshore, which we didn't do, but we took it quite casually. Take a look at agriculture. Again, Why do we have to import 50%, 60% of our pulses, our fertilizers? Okay, the argument is it was cheaper to get UAE and other countries to sort of supply us all these things. And therefore, it kept our cost of prices down. But we now realize that we are actually short of fertilizers to the point it's going to impact us. So again, in agriculture, there's an opportunity. How do we transform our grain addiction that we have in terms of producing wheat and rice into moving towards pulses, horticulture, other areas that we need to do? Same thing with, we've not explored the full potential of ethanol as Brazil has done in terms of what we grow and do it. So I think what this does, these crises, the West, there's little much we can do, as we've seen our best laid plans have gone awry in West Asia. And we thought we had the cards, which was, we had in some senses defanged Pakistan by aces that we had with UAE. We had built bridges across the Gulf, and therefore neutralized what was seen as a great advantage in the past when they would go to the OIC and complain about Kashmir, and we sort of defused that. And we thought of the IMEC and the corridor that's there. Everything we need to reevaluate in terms of how we looked at the Gulf, what you talked about, the capital, where is investment going to come in? So I think there again, the moment something like the Gulf happens, we need to shift. And see, I'm very happy that we are having an Africa conference. And I covered the South Africa elections in 1994, the historic one. We neglected that whole area. Damu Ravi is here, and he would be a great advocate in terms of telling us how India has lost that race to China and why they saw that potential long before, got all their rare earths, whatever they required and done. So I think what it does when I say great opportunities is that you can say, oh, everything's bad and things are going to go worse. But you can also invigorate the nation by saying, okay, there are 10 goals I want to do because this crisis has happened. And this crisis is showing up in the West Asia crisis is a classic example of that. How do we broad base? Where do we go next? Whether it's Africa, strengthen our ASEAN, Latin America, all these possibilities open to us when this crisis happens. And that's how I'd look at this. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. And you mentioned Dammu. He's here, Secretary Economic Relations, former. So I'm going to come to you, Dammu, at the end of the panel to ask you a couple of things about what you've heard. But let me take this to Anil right now. Anil, you and I have been speaking about energy economics, including in your excellent podcast, about the tariff shock, the energy shock. So how bad do you think it is now? And how much worse can it get? Or is it already taking a toll? Because the question was, after the elections, will there be a pass-through of the oil price increase? So how do you see the impact of the whole crisis on the Indian economy?
Thank you, Ajay. Simple response, it is a very serious shock and it is beginning to play through out of the economy. But like Raj said, the silver lining in this cloud is the fact that you can do many, many things which you wouldn't do earlier because it was not politically expedient or you didn't have the political appetite to do it. So the circumstances have changed politically within India, particularly in the last week. So two of the biggest stumbling blocks in anything, whether it's GST, whether it is delimitation, are out of power. So presumably it clears the decks for pushing through serious economic reforms. And going back to the shock, we are still beginning to only see it. And a lot of it is intangible. It is beginning to hurt sentiment, which never manifests immediately. It hits us with a lag. So, and I think the staying power of this economy is probably before we start seeing the visible impact is probably about a few weeks or a month if this conflict doesn't ease. But like Raj said, again, going back to what he also broke the doom and gloom cycle that we had slipped into on the panel. And the thing is that, there are a lot of things going for India at this point. And one thing, not just India, but the entire world, large parts of the world have demonstrated in the last 6 years since COVID struck the world. Suhasini listed quite a few of these shocks, and is the resilience. So in India's instance, not only did India survive, but it managed to thrive relatively. It could have thrived much better if this crisis was not there. But frankly, if the crisis was not there, I'm not sure a lot of these things would have been done that were done. So one big thing going India's way, I genuinely believe, in fact, the Niti Aayog just released a document, is the digital public infrastructure, which has allowed India to kind of leapfrog in particularly foundational inclusion in this country. Now, their argument is that this can be leveraged to go, basically allowed for foundational inclusion. Now you are looking to spread the wealth in this economy through livelihoods. And they have an interesting blueprint. I don't want to take up your time on this, but would direct you to this document. And so it's a challenge, but definitely an opportunity. And all these issues that everyone listed, both the ambassador and Suhasini listed, are in our face. We know these issues, but what do you do next? And I do believe that the only way forward is to double down and do things which there's a legacy of neglect in this country. Basic things like banking was not provided. I don't see the mystery or the challenge in banking people in this country, but in a decade you bank 50 crore people, but in 7 decades you couldn't bank even 1/5 of that in this country. Same way with anything you look at. So but last decade and more, I think I'm not saying this synonymous with the NDA. The whole idea of digital DPI grew from the rollout of Aadhaar, which was, again, as we all know, a UPA baby. But the idea was inherited from Vajpayee's NDA. So there is a certain bipartisan consensus on the application of DPI in this country. But it opened up enormous doors. And going forward, India 3.0, as Raj pointed out, I would see this as the next 21 years. And if you want to reach, you're at around $2,700 per capita income right now. You want to get to $18,000. It's almost like 6 times. There is no way you're going to do it through linear growth or through chalta hai. It has to come through non-linear growth. And I see DPI as a means for you to leapfrog and get to the destination.
Okay, so thanks for that. So I think that completes one round, and we've discussed the West Asia conflict so far, and we've mostly resolved it and figured out its impact on the Indian economy. But there are other conflict theaters that potentially threaten our growth trajectory. And so let's talk about that, and I'll take it to you, Suhasini. So I think a good starting point is Trump's visit to China, attempting the kind of tactical accommodation which India has been trying to do. The US economy's dependence on the Chinese economy is as large as India's in many ways. So how do you see that playing out? And then let's come to the Ukraine theater. How do you see that panning out in the first half of the year?
Well, I certainly think it'll be an important visit because it was supposed to happen already. It was supposed to happen a few weeks ago. Given that the last time Mr. Trump met with Mr. Xi, he spoke of G2. I think here in India, we're watching it extremely closely. Somebody said that the US plays chess and the Chinese play checkers. I'm actually now reminded of another Eastern game called Atari or Go, where essentially all you're doing is, trying to ring fence the adversary. And then your adversary is trying to ring fence you. And that's what's actually happening right now. Apart from the US-China compacts on trade, which frankly will go up or come down, they're showing more and more that neither of them cares about spreading that wealth in the rest of the world. When it comes to technology, both of them are making it clear that they expect to, hang on and be protectionist about where that technology goes. Each of them in their own ways. If the US puts sanctions and builds Pax Silica type organizations, China is, using very, very simple levers to stop the export of critical minerals, or whether it is even simple things like exit visas for, or exit permissions for engineers to come to India for a certain project. So we're seeing that kind of technological protectionism as well. So I think the third place where we're seeing what's going on is each of them is looking for partners. Each of them is looking at, now it seems fairly clear that we're looking in a world where there's one and two, which will eventually lead to, again, I go back to Thucydides, the idea of the emerging power and the established power at some point or the other coming to war. So regardless of what happens there, I think we have to look at what our choices are. And here I would beg to say that it is impossible for us to continue on the path we have for the past decade and a half or two, where we have assumed that India's best interests lie in somehow getting closer and closer into a pact with the United States. The US is showing us again and again they don't actually care what happens to us. That old idea of India's rise is in the US's interest is not something they are repeating anymore. Last year, the highest US tariffs on any country were on India. Brazil as well, but Brazil actually worked out a different deal. We cannot keep forgetting the lessons that we are learning in all of these and behave as if the next day is going to be lovely. I know that I've been put in the doom and gloom bracket as opposed to the all is well bracket. But I genuinely feel that we are now not even looking at the immediate lessons of the past. In 2019, Mr. Trump said, drop all Iranian oil. What did India do? We dropped all Iranian oil. In 2019, he said, drop all Venezuelan oil. We dropped all Venezuelan oil. You come to 2025, by which time we should have built strategic reserves of discounted oil. Instead, we are now paying, having given up Russian oil, again on Mr. Trump's say-so, we are now paying double. You know, yesterday the figures came out for oil energy procurement. We used to get Russian oil at a discount of about 5%. We are now paying a premium of 3% for the same Russian oil that we decided to drop last year. I'm making the point again and again. Mr. Trump said, give up Chabahar port. Today, Chabahar port may have actually been of some use because it is at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz and has land connectivity. I'm not saying that's possible given what the US and Israel did. I'm just saying that we are cutting our own opportunities, and you know what Raj mentioned, that conflict brings opportunity. But we are ourselves closing those opportunities because we are assuming again and again that the mistakes of the last few years will not be repeated, or that the US will finally come to its senses. We've already got a huge shock from China. After 2020, it doesn't matter how close we get to China in terms of business or technology, or even in terms of regional cooperation. At the end of the day, we will have to man our line of actual control, 3,500 kilometers long, for the foreseeable future. That is going to be a drain on our resources meant for other parts of our military modernization. That's going to be a reality. So I'm just making the point that Mr. Trump will go there, Mr. Rubio will come here, hopefully he will discuss with the Quad what Mr. Trump is discussing with China. I'm not sure how this works. Actually, to be honest, India has tried to host the Quad summit for 2 years. We failed. We're hoping that it'll happen this year, but then there's a midterm election that might stop that. I think we finally have to stand up on our 2 feet and say, this is the moment where India says, we cannot count on any of these powers. Each of these powers is behaving in its own interests and totally to the detriment of ours. Even what Russia did in Ukraine doesn't change. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that we can support them or we can not support them, and we can go with the oil sanctions or not go with the oil sanctions. But at the end of the day, Russia was doing Russia. So it's time for India to do India.
Okay, great. So I'll take that to you, Raj. So it's a good segue because Suhasini is already talking of the US as an unreliable partner. But if you see the entire sweep of this 16-month relationship with Trump 2.0, we had a tariff challenge for 6 of those 16 months, and from August till February, and it's kind of changed. So, do you think the US is now a less reliable partner, notwithstanding the tariff issue having been resolved, or is it something that one needs to look at very carefully?
Tough one, but let me try. I think I'll just context it again. In some sense, Clausewitz said that war is politics by other means, right? That's what he said. I think foreign policy should be national interest through other means, right? And if you put it in that context, then all relations begin to fall into a different place. You're not just doing USA because you have to do USA, but because you need certain things from them. And if you take a look at across this, obviously it is our most consequential relationship. Because when you identify the national goals that we need to do, if we call this India 3.0, and I was just this morning thinking, okay, what is it that we need to do in the months ahead, years ahead? What does India really need to do if it has to establish its national interests and secure it, as Suhasini had mentioned, very, very important in terms of self-reliance, and as Anil had pointed out earlier. So one, of course, we've always aspired to be a manufacturing power. Who would help us do that? Which are the markets? Which are the areas that we can push for? I see Ajay nodding his head. He runs a big company that does a lot of these things, right? Ajay Khanna, not you. Okay. And second, we want to be a tech power. Who gives us that power, right? If you take a look at when we talk of tech power, it's AI that's dominating our discourse. It is semiconductor chips that's dominating that. Where do we get those things from? Who do we collaborate with? That should be our interest. There would be issues that we'd have to confront with every single country. And with China, which we talked of earlier, they are vital to us for what? The APIs, pharmaceutical industry. We cannot ignore them. We've now started building our bridges once more because we understand it's impacting our growth, right? Solar cells and energy. You can't move your solar program unless you have China on board because they make the cheapest of stuff. So that becomes a national priority in terms of our relationship. And then if you go further, resilient supply chains, which we wanted, which we've seen now come under this thing. Where does USA and China play in that role that they should be playing? And where are our stakes in that? And how do we build our relations to ensure that we keep that balance without the pride in saying, look at the way that guy's talking on. That diplomacy that you practiced for many years has been destroyed by Trump. There's no, it's all out there in the open like two boys fighting, like bullies. You can see it. The whole discourse has deteriorated to the point of tutu, meh, kind of this thing. I mean, it's just destroyed everything we knew about it. Maybe that's what we wanted. This world probably required a shake-up of a kind. So I'm not dissing Trump in any way. Maybe you had to get a shock into the system. We were too comfortable. We were just getting along. But there were really serious problems that the world faced that now has come out and we are just seeing it bursting. It's just an alternative view. I'm not endorsing what Trump is doing, but just saying that. And if you go down the entire thing, defense, who do we get our equipment from? Russia? China obviously is not there. Europe? US. Who has the best? And how do we negotiate? So there again, we have a leverage. For whatever Trump does to us, we have a certain leverage because we are among the world's largest defense equipment buyers. How can we leverage that? So I'm trying to put this as what he talked about, digital public infrastructure, and what Anil talked about, and how important that is for us in terms of our foreign policy, in propagating that across various geographies, especially when we talk of the global south. Where can we tap that expertise we have developed and go there and do the kind of things that China sometimes does, but we don't seem to be bothered doing it. And if you green energy that we've been looking for, who is better than to have a look at some of the best technologies that's coming from there? So I think the larger point I'm making is, and you can go down the order as to what India requires in the next thing I'd mentioned earlier, agriculture, you have to do those things. Who is doing and which country can we go to and tap those things? And I think USA then becomes very important in the way we are dealing with them. Yes, we have had, no one can understand Trump as we have seen, and every day is a new day in foreign policy over there. But we have our constants as national interests. And as long as we pursue that, and I think we've done that cleverly you can call it compact or whatever the new things that they have signed up recently when Prime Minister Modi was there. All of them important. It's in our interest to energize those. There will be conflict, there will be issues, we will have problems with them on various fronts, but it is the skillfulness of our diplomacy, our national interest that we keep strongly in mind and do the kind of things, work with the US in various ways that benefit us, whether it's in tech, as I mentioned, defense, looking across at various geographies and where they come into it and how we can benefit from that, leverage them. Well, you can have Suhasini's point of view, which is, look, tell them off where it doesn't suit you. Yes, you could still do that, but I think that doesn't mean duck all those issues. But it's how you maneuver and navigate through these very, very troubled times where you've got on both sides of the sea monsters staring at you, and you have to start working your way through it. And therefore, a lot of this, I believe, a lot of our foreign policy now must be very, very clear-headed national interests, putting that and saying, okay, this is what we need, and this is the nations we negotiate, and that includes Africa and other areas. We just neglect ourselves and we sort of unifocus on that. That's my larger point. Thank you.
Navdeep, let me come to you on the northern neighbor of your territory, West Asia, which is Europe. So just reflect on the Ukraine crisis. Do you see it ending quicker? You know, Trump was in fact asked this question, which one do you think will end first, West Asia or Ukraine? And he couldn't answer that question. So I'm wondering whether you will. Which ends first? And, you know, this whole concert of middle powers that we are talking about with the Europeans, do you think that's sustainable? That'll be a new defining friendship for this century?
So the West Asia crisis as in plural, have been around for a lot longer than the Ukraine war, right? And so even if this current situation with Iran gets resolved one way or the other through a ceasefire and eventually through some kind of settlement, the pattern that you have seen is that many of the underlying causes remain unaddressed and keep popping up from time to time. So if I had to make a guess, I would say that Ukraine will get resolved faster than the crisis in West Asia would. And for West Asia, the reason for my pessimism is that Israel is systematically closing every possible option for a resolution to the Palestinian issue. Most of us continue to absent-mindedly pay lip service to two-state solution. It's dead. Might as well recognize it's dead. There is no pathway possible today to an independent Palestinian state because of the way the settlements are being constructed illegally in the occupied West Bank, and the fact that Israel has taken control of 53% of Gaza, right? Is a one-state solution possible where Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and Palestinians can live together under some kind of a framework? Maybe, certainly not in this government in Israel. And the pessimism comes from the fact that every single election in Israel over the last 20 years has seen one step right, one step right, one step right. The people who used to be fringe borderline criminal are in the cabinet, right? So that's how far the country has traveled. So that's why I think the reason for pessimism is all pathways for any kind of lasting solution are being closed. Now, on Europe, I think, look, at the G20 summit, we came out with the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor project. There's geography. And the idea at that time, post-Abraham Accords, everybody very optimistic. I was in a conference in Abu Dhabi, which had been incidentally organized by the American Jewish Committee, which now has a full-fledged chapter in Abu Dhabi, headed by a former US ambassador. And at that time, the conference was in IMEC, and you had everybody from Adani Ports in Haifa to folks from Delhi. And I was saying, but why are you not confronting the elephant in the room, which is that you need a modicum of security to make these grandiose plans happen. If you are unwilling to address that there is a problem of security, who is going to invest the tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars in the kind of infrastructure that you are envisaging? And, I just want to take one little shot at what Raj said about the government acting in pragmatic ways to serve the national interest. I'm not sure whether our national interest is best served by giving in to a bully. I think that the classic wisdom of standing up to a bully still remains valid. I also think that when a very close friend and ally like Israel acts in ways that are actively inimical to our national interest, then we should be able to tell that friend and ally that don't do this. This is going to hurt us. As Sohani said, they've brought a war to our doorstep with consequences that our economy is facing, which our people will face. So, somewhere I'm okay with people saying there is no place for morality in foreign policy. It is all about pragmatism and national interest. But there isn't that large a contradiction either. If we want to be the voice of the global South, let's accept it that in the forthcoming BRICS summit, we will be a minority, a very, very small minority, carrying the can for Israel. And that's not a desirable solution in terms of our national interests. So I think we should rediscover our ability to speak up for what is right and speak up for what is wrong. Otherwise, when it comes to bite us in the backside, we will find that we don't have a leg to stand on.
Okay, I think that's great. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm looking at the clock as well, and you've been such a patient audience, so I want to really take it now to the audience. So we've covered all the theaters, and I think we had a sufficient number of provocations from the panel to get some questions from the audience. But I'm going to start with Damu right here. And yeah, please pass a mic. So Damu, on anything you've heard, and particularly on the resilience of the Indian economy, in terms of all this conflict and taking all the pain, how much is our capacity?
Thank you, Ajay, and good morning to all. First of all, I came with a purpose to get some gyan. I think that purpose has been fulfilled, and excellent panel. Ajay, I would like to reflect on the current crisis a bit. In my view, this crisis has left a lot of lessons for many countries. Okay, and I think the first important lesson is wherever the global crisis may be, wherever the localized crisis that we may be hearing, that in an interconnected world, it will affect everybody. So countries that are directly involved and those that are not involved. And another lesson is the most vulnerable countries will be affected most, which is actually the global South. Okay. The second thing is the lesson is we always felt that you got to have a nuclear weapon to be able to play the deterrent game. But this conflict has given us a message that not necessarily so. The mission ahead of the man is the art of the game today. And you low-cost drones are able to create that deterrence and keep the superpower at bay. I think that's a very important lesson here. And the third lesson is that I don't know how this conflict is going to really pan out, but the crisis in the Middle East will continue for quite some time to come. And if it is ceasefire, Iran will be stronger. If not ceasefire, you'll have the Arab-Israel conflict continuing. But there is another dimension to it. I think that Russia and China will play an important role for the energy security point of view. In some sense, it's also a proxy war for China because it's experimenting a lot of its weapons in this conflict, just as it did in the Sindoor. The fourth understanding that I would like to take away from this is actually how this conflict will pan out. If it's going to be a ceasefire, Iran will come out to be stronger. If it is not going, and it will also weaken the image of the United States, and that will mean a lot. We are in the second quarter of the 21st century, but it's also a signal that there is the decline of the West might have started. That's an indication. Because the national security strategy of the United States has somewhat given that indication. The hegemony will be managed hemispherically. And that's what Trump has conveyed that. So if that is so, then you have geopolitical impacts will be managed by big nations, and geo-economic interests will be negotiated by nations. And that's what we're going to see out. So what does it leave us? Where does it leave us? In my view, if we are not economically strong, you will always be bullied. And again, I think from the panel, we realized that, India was the most affected by Trump tariffs, although we are a strategic partner. There was no concession given on that. So China got a better deal. And Russia-Ukraine war, but United States was willing to have a negotiation with Russia. I think that's a very interesting takeaway from that. But what do we have to do in the days to come? In my view, as a country, we need to create domestic capacities very aggressively. We should not wait for a crisis to happen to make that realization. We are today, look at our own capacities. 1.5 days of LPG, 1 week of oil. That is no way a big nation should be thinking about. And look at it, what other countries have. Japan has 120 reserves of oil. China has 180 days of reserves of oil. So those capacities need to be built. The other important item is, if you want to be a leader, then you should create stakes in other countries in you. They have to have more stakes in you. And that, how you do it is an art again. We have to be thinking about in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Asia, many of these regions, it is just not about trade. It is more integration of the economies that's important there. I think that game requires a deeper understanding, which is beyond just the bureaucratic decision-making, the political leadership, understanding of how the world is evolving around us. It requires expertise thinking, a long game, not a short game. That is what India should be looking at. In my view, we can play. I think there are capacities we are developing, but we perhaps have to have a more strategic thinking in the way we approach the global south. Digital technologies, which are again low-cost solutions that India has successfully implemented in the country, have a great value in empowering those nations. In the same way, we should be able to create the economic value locally in those countries, but how we do it requires a deeper thinking, assembling, local manufacturing, rather than exporting everything from our country and looking at Atmanirbhar Bharat in an exclusive sense. But it should be a more integrated way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So, essentially you're arguing for diversification because the strategic vulnerability of trade is really high on the US for exports, on China for imports. So I think the message we heard also in the panel was of diversification. But now the floor is open for any questions from the audience. Yes, let's start.
Hi, thank you. I just want to follow up on a point that Harish, I work for Cisco. I'm also a co-founder of PAFI.
Founder of?
PAFI.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to follow up on a point that Suhasini made, but I want to ask a question to you, Ajay, because I don't want you to miss out on answering questions. This point about us kind of going at the bidding of Trump each time, I presume that there must be a bunch of very bright people inside the government who are looking at the economic costs of standing up, right? So since you're recently retired, I just want to get a sneak preview in how does this government thinking work? And are we actually building enough strategic reserves to take on the countries at a later stage? Are we building capacities? And is there a lot of thinking that's going into it? Are executions happening on that?
Right. Okay. So I'll take the first stab at that and pass it to Suhasini. The way I think a government looks at it is that the last 2 years or the last year and a half have been a wake-up call. And there was a certain wake-up call with the China factor, which resulted in the declaration as policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliance, because there was a feeling that there was strategic vulnerability to so much critical dependence that India had. And now I think somewhere the message has come to government that there ought to be diversification of partnerships, and notwithstanding the dependence on the United States for defense and for technology and as an export destination, the US has proven to be a less reliable partner than India imagined. And therefore, there ought to be various hedging strategies and management strategies of this new sort of behavior of the US, which might, in fact, outlast Trump. So it's not necessarily something that is specific to Trump, because the US has a policy of certain, Congress decisions and sanctions which can reverse its own policy. So I think the sense has come in government that while there is a strong strategic partnership with the US for defense, for technology, for even geopolitical balancing, it should not be an unquestioned policy, and therefore there ought to be various hedging strategies which Damood spoke about. So I think in this day and age, government policies also have to be nimble and change continuously based on the behavior of the major powers. And I see several indications that that's what's happening. Suhasini.
I do think that a move back to the center is actually what is looked for. Knee-jerk anti-Americanism, betting against America have historically been proven as not necessarily the answers. But I would say that if 10 years ago, Prime Minister Modi went to the US Congress and said it is time to shrug off the hesitations of history, I think what Ambassador Bisaria is saying is what I would say is bring some of those hesitations back. Don't allow yourself not to have the hedges that we had in the past. Because, and again, this is, as I said, this is not about Trump or Trumperica. This is not about the idea that, okay, in 2 years, he will go, somebody will return, we'll go back to the old normal. It is about looking inherently at which of our national interests, and in that is national security interests, that have been damaged, repairably or irreparably, over the past, and now I'm not saying 1 year, I'm saying over the past 10 years, because this has been part of it. So if you are to look at our economic security, the US is showing with its tariffs that we're not going back to the past. Our exporters have already paid a cost. Just because we are not seeing it today, each of us knows in the audience there will be people who know people who have really suffered badly in the last year with the tariffs. But it wasn't just the tariffs, it's the investment. If you are being told that today India will put $500 billion in the US, you're not hearing the US is putting investment in India. We yesterday have recognized at the Select USA Summit that India was the country which made the single largest investments in the US. I mean, there is a point at which we have to start looking at ourselves. It's not enough just to do these things to make somebody else happy. The third is about our next generation. And the fact that today the next generation is being discouraged from studying in the US, from working in the US, from considering a long-term strategy to live and work over there. It's fine. It's our people. We have to take care of them. But it is essentially a hit on our security economically. There is a hit on our energy security, and that's why I made the point that in an age where India is an energy-dependent nation, needs to secure its energy, one country is saying, you can't buy from Iran, go to zero. Cut down Russia. Venezuela, you can buy, but only buy once I have kidnapped their leader, changed the government to my side, and then I will tell you which oil you can buy because I get a cut on it. You are letting, with each successive step, India is letting somebody else decide not only our energy security, we're letting them decide our foreign policy. Because there are foreign policy consequences. You were asking, what is the government thinking? There are foreign policy consequences to every economic step that we have taken, perhaps in a short-term economic security strategy. And finally, I'll say, we have to look much more closely at what, we've looked so closely at what China has done in our neighborhood. We know when every Chinese submarine shows up, we know that we have to say something about it. How is it that we don't have to say anything about a US submarine torpedoing a ship for the first time since World War II right off our shores? Regional security is being affected. What happened in Bangladesh was, I say this without any doubt, was a local reaction, a political reaction, but it had a lot of support from a lot of other countries. What is happening in Nepal? What is happening in the rest of our region? And finally, what is happening with Pakistan? Ambassador Bisaria would be better set to tell you that the kind of enablement that Mr. Trump has given Pakistan over the last year, and it's not just about this peace mediation, those impacts will be felt by us. So your economic security is being damaged. Your energy security is being damaged with foreign policy consequences. Our regional security is being damaged. We have to sit up, recognize what is happening, and find our own way through this crisis.
Right. I think you've provoked the panel with this question because Raj wants to come in also. But before that, I'll just add to what Suhasini said. And I feel if you look at Trump 2.0, there've been a lot of positives, but there've been three irritants that have come into the relationship. And the first and most important, of course, was the tariff shock of 50%, the highest global tariff. The second was the US becoming tone deaf on Pakistan. And the Trump administration effectively bringing back a hyphen. And, the invitation to Asim Munir to come to the White House for lunch shortly after Op Sindoor was like telling Netanyahu, look, we're getting the Hamas chief over for lunch. Why don't you come and join us? So I think that was an act which was at the most charitable, I would call, tone deaf to Indian concerns, which past US administrations have been careful of doing. And the third irritant has been the continuous rhetoric that, calling India a dead economy, a hellhole, that kind of thing. So I think these irritants have crept into the relationship. I would still call them irritants because the larger direction of the relationship is positive. But India is conscious of this and, is sort of reacting to that. But over to you, Raj.
No, I just had a follow-up point to what you said. And obviously, there are things we can't change, and that's Trump. Right? And he's going to do what he has to do. As in life, there are many things that happen around us that have nothing to do with the way we have behaved. How do you then deal with crises? I think that's the most important thing. And take a look at what happens, what Suhasini had mentioned about what he's doing to our entire H-1B policy that we had encouraged. Now, a whole lot of, I don't know, what's the number, 500,000 people sitting there in the US. Is there an opportunity? Okay, for long, the brightest and the best went there. And now suddenly that promised land is not so attractive anymore. Is there something that all of us put together can say, okay, we need all that talent back here. Can we get them here and do things that are extraordinary in technology, in whichever areas? Give them if you're giving PLIs to Apple, give them something else here and say, hey, our entire AI sector is terrible. Can you come back here and transform it and become a world leader? If you could do all that in the US, tell us what is the facilities you require here, make us the AI hub, if that's what it is. So that's opportunity. I mean, that's the way you look at it. The second thing I think you need to look at is I mean, just to, in some way, paraphrase what Deng Xiaoping did in China, right? He said when there was huge upheavals that China was under pressure, he said, bide your time, hide your strengths. I would say, build your strengths. And what is it that when we keep looking across, we tend to think that that is the most important thing and therefore India can't move forward. Just take a look around us here, and I think that's what we have to do if we have to build our strengths. Because we're talking of India 3.0, just not geopolitics, just not foreign policy, but we're looking at us as a nation. What do we need to do? Just take a look and look at the obstacles we have put to growth. Land. Try getting land, any industry, any place, anywhere. We have to free that up. We have to take a policy stand and say that is something we've dodged the bullet for too long. You try registering your house, which you buy, if you don't have to pay money. I mean, let's be honest. What are we doing to our civic? Just go into Delhi and see what's happening. If cities are the engines of growth, why is garbage being treated the way it is? And we all quietly watching these dalaos or whatever it is overflow with garbage, and we call ourselves, hey, we are moving towards a great developed nation. Why aren't we attending to civic issues? Right? Why aren't we strengthening our own cities? That doesn't require USA, doesn't require China, doesn't require any of these guys to do anything. It just requires us to say, we need to get a clean garbage system going. Delhi is polluted. How do you stop it? How do you make it great again? Then take a look at some of the regulatory issues, since there's a lot of you all represent industry. There is so much cholesterol in that issue. That has nothing to do with USA. That has nothing to do with all that. Simplify. I think the government is on it. Mr. Gauba is sitting there and trying to break a lot of that constraints that we have. But that's number one. If this government has to do things, it's in the domestic side. I'm not saying internationally we don't have to do the things we are doing. So take a look at some of the things that you mentioned, logistics. Are we really the fastest when we do things? Our ports, connectivity, roads. I mean, there's been great strides we've made, there's no doubt. But can we do that and make it faster? Because we have a huge country ourselves in terms of consumption. The faster we get, the more competitive. When we talk of competing with the global forces, we're talking of competition with Vietnam, with China, with people who do it far better and cheaper than we do. How do we build that strength, I think, is the big thing about India 3.0. I mean, I can go on. You just have a look, power availability. It's okay in Delhi, but go elsewhere. Are we getting the power we require, the 24/7, providing that, the whole controversy over electric, generating your own power through solar and the grid issues. Take a look at all our power discoms, they're all going at a loss. Municipalities going at a loss. I mean, we are looking abroad for a lot of our solutions, but actually we must be sitting here and saying, we'll sort this. If we are going to set an agenda for the government, these are the 3 things I will do because we have a worldwide crisis and that worldwide crisis is impinging on us. We can't sort that out. Let's sort what we can. That's my point. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Yeah. Yes, the lady here, please.
So, I have a question on the West Asia crisis. So, essentially, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, my name is Suparna Pandey. I'm with the Cohen Group. So, my question is, I mean, we spoke about, spreading, the crisis spreading and, the impact on India. But are there any state, non-state actors who would have the incentive and capability to kind of expand this that will draw in South Asia, because that will become even closer for us and, we have to then directly get involved. So your take on it.
Very briefly, I think the longer these festering sores continue, the greater the potential for radicalization. There's almost a direct equation between them. Whether it is Hamas or Hezbollah or ISIS or any of these other manifestations, they've emerged from a certain situation. So, if you don't come back to how do you bring about resolutions to long-standing conflicts, you will see the emergence of non-state actors. I can tell you from my years in the Arab world that forget the monarchies of the Gulf, but look at Jordan or Lebanon or Egypt in particular, or a host of other countries. there is this festering sense of impotence, which you can feel on the street about the ability of these countries, the inability of these countries to do anything to address the situations they face. The impunity that Israel enjoys in the region is a daily irritant for them. The regimes in these countries, say in Egypt, they do not allow a pro-Palestine demonstration because they know it can easily get out of hand. You can do it in Colombia, but you can't do it in Cairo. So somewhere that pressure then that is building up manifests into the emergence of non-state actors. So if you can't address these issues and if they keep lingering, then those actors will spill over. The radicalization is a given. The next generation of Hamas is going to be worse than Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar was worse than the predecessor who was killed. The next generation of Hezbollah is going to be more extreme. The next generation in Islam is worse, more hardline. You have enough documented history on this. So I think we keep just making the same mistakes over and over again.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. Swasni, my questions to you. We've sort of talked about, Ashwini, Astrom. We've talked about the fact that we've come to realization that US is an unreliable partner. I think the same realization is sitting home in Europe, that no longer can NATO or the transatlantic partnership be seen, and they are going to redefine. Where is the opinion of this panel in terms of our engagement with Europe, and how does our engagement with EU redefine the geopolitics that allows us to do whatever we are talking about in terms of unleashing the tiger of India?
Can we take 3 questions this time? Yes, go ahead, please.
So I have 2 brief questions.
Just repeat your name for the audience.
Yeah, I am Arun Goel. I am a
Arun.
former civil servant. So the first is when the ceasefire is going on, why Israel-Lebanon thing is not coming and they're still pounding Lebanon. So does the Israel-Lebanon, so I mean, do they have a bigger design of occupying part of Lebanon and having the settlements over there? So that is one part. And the second is that Russia and China, of course, they have vetoed the resolutions which are against Iran, but they have not openly come up in war. But do you think that covertly or secretly they are supplying information to Iran, because particularly about satellite imagery, other things, because the way Iran has been able to attack the targets, it has been very, very accurate. So is there some sort of hidden kind of a thing going on inside here? That's it.
Yeah. Was there another hand? No. So let's go with these 3. Suhasini, EU, Europe, and then Israel, Lebanon, and
Very
China,
simply,
Russia.
I think it's a no-brainer. Europe and India have a lot in common because of also the idea of diversity, pluralism, and democracy that is engendered in both places. If you were to see Europe as a federation of states, as we do our country, I think we're making moves on the trade front with this EU FTA, and there's a real, it's not just an FTA like we call everybody a strategic partner. Now we have an FTA with everybody, but there are some FTAs that actually will change the game when it comes to trade, and I think the EU-India one is one of them. The second has to be on technology. The fact that whether it is renewables, whether it is manufacturing, the base of R&D that we are seeing in Europe that we can benefit from and be the force multiplier for has to be there. I'm just not sure if that is yet at a place where we can talk about the strategic commonalities. The EU has an Indo-Pacific strategy. India has not yet agreed to be part of NATO Plus and all the rest. But I genuinely think that that's, again, and I sound like I'm just repeating myself when I come back to the idea of strategic autonomy, because for India, it's as much about our history and anti-colonial past and all the rest, as it is about our geography. If I am to look at India in terms of my continental challenges and my maritime challenges, I look at my continental challenges, my 2 biggest adversaries that I have to focus a lot of my military resources on are on my continental front, China and Pakistan. After that, if you go one step, 2 countries, 3 countries, 4 countries, you will reach Moscow without finding a single country in the Western broader alliance or even pro-Western sphere. You might find them in your maritime sphere, but you will not find them in your continental sphere. As a result, you have to constantly do that balancing game. And therefore, I would say again with Europe, given Europe's predilection, and they'll get over their Greenland and whatever else Mark Carney said in January at some point, Europe will have the opposite, that no matter what they do, standing on their own is not engendered in the way working with the transatlantic partnership is. So I think that's where we will have some kind of mismatch of our expectations.
Yeah,
On
Lebanon,
yeah.
China, Russia.
So on Lebanon in particular, but in the larger context, I think if you remember, the first Israeli invasion of Lebanon was in 1982 against the Palestinian refugee camps in the suburbs of Beirut. At that time, the immediate cause was Palestinians in Beirut. Since then, there have been multiple efforts to take part of Lebanon. There was a time when, under Ariel Sharon, Israel was occupying land up to the Litani River. It gave rise to Hezbollah as the movement which wanted to liberate those lands. And we know how that is progressing. The worry is that people with such a deep sense of history are not learning the lessons of this recent history. Today, you have this sentiment being articulated by multiple leaders, not just the fringe, about a greater Israel. And that includes, so the notion is that security will come through strength and security will come through expanded borders. And Litani River in Lebanon becomes your security point. The Golan Heights in Syria become your security perimeter. Gaza becomes a security perimeter. The regrettable thing is the only time Israel got security with its largest and most powerful neighbor was by returning Sinai to Egypt under the Camp David Accord. You have a template which has somewhere been forgotten, that you could, occupying land does not give you security, period. It will only give rise to liberation movements across. So I think there's no lessons there. But right now, Israel is continuing with a failed policy that hasn't worked in the past. On Russia and China, there's enough documented evidence now. There was this whole detailed expose in the Financial Times about the IRGC actually buying an in-orbit satellite, the TE-001, for a princely sum of $36 million to get 1.5 meter resolution data that enabled them to do precision targeting of not just the American military bases and American assets, but precision to a point that when they struck the Ras Laffan facility in Qatar, the LNG facility, they only, out of the 14 trains over there, they only targeted 2. Train number 2 and 6, which were co-owned by Exxon. So clearly the data is available to them to enable them to do the kind of precision targeting that they wouldn't have been able to do. For the Chinese, for the Russians, this is an exceptionally lucrative, low-cost operation. You are using up US munitions, you are using up, tying them down, you are wearing them down. And I think the largest impact for US and for China and Russia is that the inability of the Americans to impose a military solution on Iran is being exposed. And that has profound consequences going forward.
Right. And on the China story, the same Financial Times story was talking about Pakistan being used as a conduit for secretly passing on weaponry. So, Pakistan was really playing it all sides. It was the conduit for Chinese weaponry. Raj wanted to come in on Europe.
Yeah, just a point, and since a lot of you all, I think, represent large companies that also have an export front, Looking at Europe and the fact that we signed a trade deal with them, as well as now, in some ways, we'll start operating in the US, I think this is a very positive trend. I think Damu Ravi must have fought his whole career trying to get trade deals. And suddenly all of them have all been bunched together in the last thing. This, I think, is a very, very positive trend that requires a lot of companies to get into the business. One of the things is we do these trade deals and Indian business doesn't really come forward and try and, they have the stomach for that or the kind of initiatives that they need to do. Many big companies do it, but they seem to lack, including in places like Africa, where there's so many opportunities, but our business is very happy to do the kind of safe business here, protected, not worried about the other issues, not wanting to take that huge risk to go there. So my point is a couple of things. If you're looking at India 3.0, it has to be a great exporting nation, as China was. And if you take a look at our statistics, it's not very heartening if you take a look at manufacturing, merchandise exports, right? Not just manufacturing, but merchandise exports. They've stagnated at about $400 billion, if I'm not mistaken. It is service exports that has really grown and now touched about 400. So therefore, we have $800 billion trade that's there. But service sector, as we've seen, is under enormous pressure because of what's happening in America and other places. Very difficult to get our people, the whole migration policy. So it has to be on the merchandise that we need to boost considerably what we need to do. And therefore, all the points that I had made earlier about making ease of doing business and ease of living is so very critical, because if we have to sort the job issue, which is our biggest number one problem, you can say whatever you want to and whichever government comes, but that's our number one problem. It'll only happen when you start doing a lot of these things. And therefore, we must be a very export-oriented, make sure that we are getting, wherever we get a chance. I'm very glad that the government has signed a raft of treaties. These need to be, of course, executed and implemented, but that's the way forward. I think if you're looking at foreign policy, hitting national interest, trade is the place we should be. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we are nearing 1:10. We have 3 more minutes. So I'm going to also give the floor to Anil later to give 3 takeaways for a business audience from this panel on the economic side. But just to give you my quick 1-minute summary of what I think the panel has been trying to say, is that I think given this flux, for countries as well as for companies, a policy would be in the short term to be very nimble about, having not to be run by ideology and not be run by past patterns, but be nimble in terms of changing course. In the medium term, to diversify, including the issues that Raj and Suhasini spoke about, the trade agreements, for instance, diversifying partnerships. And then in the long term, what Raj is emphasizing continuously, to strengthen the Indian economy, to strengthen Indian capacities, and to be able to get genuinely to that low dependency on volatile partner situation. So I think that is what the message would be, but over to Anil for the final word.
Thanks, Ajay. This tough call to sum up this as 3 takeaways, but like Raj kept emphasizing, it's one thing that is very clear is that geopolitics and economics are now 2 sides of the same coin. It was always the case, but it's become more obvious today. And we are living now in, the new normal is the abnormal. I think the best analogy I can give you is the new trend that has picked up in driving in Delhi, wrong side driving. So there was a time I used to rail against it. Now I'm adjusting to it, so developing a rear view mirror sight, etc. So I think that's the new phenomenon which we have to deal with. And frankly, this fragmentation is going to worsen. I think it was very clear from not just this panel, even from all that we know. And it is, so geopolitics, the only way India and all you Indian all companies, not just Indian, who are operating out of India, is that you outgrow this volatile world where the growth is going to be up and down. So India has to maintain this 7 to 8% growth. And this can't come without what Raj was kept emphasizing, that you do a massive amount of domestic reform. Good news is that the government is cognizant of it. Even better news is some of the opposition roadblocks are out of the window. So hopefully that gives them the right energy mix to push the agenda. And Ajay's favorite thing, ease of living, which I think is a huge issue. And finally, I'll close with what I do read it is in Economic Times today. India's biggest challenge is the lack of trust. And this lack of trust is the reason why KYC and what Raj said, he just sold a huge property, and he couldn't register it without paying bribes. So see, that's the lack of trust in the economy. I think these are basic transactions which should go through open and shut case. So I will say, I tried to summarize. I couldn't do 3, but I did many takeaways.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you. That ends this panel. Over to you, Shubham.
Thank you, Ambassador Visaria. As a person who has to read out the vote of thanks, it's always difficult to kind of end this conversation and summarize what you guys said, because this has been such a fantastic and articulate session. So please thank on behalf of PAFI and the audience, Ambassador Ajay Visaria, thank you for running such a amazing panel. Very difficult, given that you have such a treasure trove of knowledge as well, and kind of intermingling those ideas with everybody else's. Anil, Suhasini, Ambassador Suri, and Raj Changappa as well. I will not dare to summarize what they have already said, except for maybe remind everybody. I mean, there used to be a serial called Tamas one time, and it used to start with the placard saying, "Those who forget history are bound to repeat it." So I think a lot of what we heard today remind me of that. Listening to Suhasini that US is unreliable, I was wondering, when have they been reliable in the last 3 to 4 decades? I mean, if you go back from the era of 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. And the question then becomes is like, what do we need to do? And as Ambassador Visaria said, we need to wake up. I was just wondering, our reminder alarm clock is really bad, because we wake up, we go to sleep, we wake up, we go to sleep, and it's like a perpetual cycle where we refuse to learn. As Ambassador Suri was saying, we are not just getting our act right. The question on exports, and as Raj also said, why do exporters export? We have to think of it, because our domestic market is not as strong, right? They get a better value for the dollar that they get out of the export. But the question is, what do we do? Our domestic economy is not as strong. We need to find markets, and we find markets like the US, which are back to base one, unreliable. So back to the tariff conundrum. One or two observations as companies here, and maybe on behalf of this. I met a global CEO recently, and his question to me was, do Indians really want FDI? I'm like, why do you say that? He said, because everything that you do is not in favor of FDI, right? And I was looking at the figures. In 2025, we got $35 billion. India needs way more than $35 billion a year. And why is it not happening? Back to what we are saying. We are doing it to ourselves what others are not able to, which is taxes, regulatory policies. I can see Rakesh nodding his head. He has, as a Carlyle representative, he has a long list of pain points. But it goes back to show that what we can do. But not a pessimist, always an optimist. So ending on what Anil said, there is a blueprint, technology it is. And one piece of information which the audience will benefit from, we talk about AI boom and tech boom. Because of this crisis, server costs are shooting through the roof. The tech boom that we talk about is actually not looking very good. India has no availability of memory chips. Server costs are rising through the roof. So the whole tech cycle is also going to get threatened. So overall, as an optimist, there is a blueprint. Agree with Anil. I think we need to get our act in order. And I think for that, we don't need a crisis. When the crisis continues, we will figure out how that crisis ends. By tomorrow morning, maybe there's a solution, or maybe by tomorrow night, there won't be a solution. So on that very note, thank you all for joining us. I invite everybody to come for the lunch now. I don't want to be the man in the middle of lunch and you, but for all PAFI members at 2:30 to 3:30 is the main members-only business session. So please join us. And now may I invite the one and only Ajay Khanna to come and felicitate all the speakers. Ajay and Vish. Huh? If you allow, if the government of the day allows.
I think that they are up to that. This is what they want.